folder balance practice in a second here.
Lucy. Nice to meet you too.
How y'all doing?
Good.
Good. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for
It's our pleasure.
Hey, I'm Christina. Nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Sure.
I'm Maggie. Thank you so much for being here. Did you all come out as Move On volunteers?
Yeah.
Or CPD?
Move on.
Awesome. You're always happy to stand together with Move On in front of the
All right.
Supreme Court and complain about
Yeah.
what you're doing. All right.
Point out all the things that are wrong.
In case they didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I know. I sometimes wonder if they know who we are.
Yeah.
Do they have a wall?
We think we're from Ottawa, so it's like, this is a little bit better than email.
Yes.
Some of my first things here.
Right. We're just waiting on Representative Jaya Paul and Rana Epting from Move On to get started.
Thank you.
So
For a change, I'm early this morning. Just a little
impressive.
bit early.
Yeah, you want to stand like closer to the guy.
So tell us, while we're standing here, talk strategy. What can you do to engage members on the
You know, I think we just have to keep up the pressure for awareness, keep bringing it to folks' attention. These kinds of activities are important. All of the stakeholder organizations need to be calling and emailing and buttonholing the representatives to put a bug in their ear. And then we really need to get with staff also.
Yeah.
And so the
we want you to be the brains and take a step closer.
task force we formed a couple of weeks ago.
Act like you like each
That's what
other,
our
right?
task is to acquaint staffers as well as members about the need for corporate and you all building from the outside, we building from the inside, and then more public stuff coming out like this. Brings attention. So many members
Should we do like multiple
don't look at the court as and I was one of them for 50, for 60,
There's a little bit because they're in the shots.
Yeah.
Patrick, can we get the...
for 64 years or so. I'm a lawyer. I just did not look at the court as being a political institution, but I've learned that it is. And it's been carefully constructed. Now it's corrupt. And it should not be this way. It should be the way that I always envisioned it to be. We need to get back to that, but everybody doesn't have that same awareness. And so, yeah.
Still, that's why.
And even lawyers in we get conservative and we don't want to make any changes. We don't want to leave our comfort zone. We don't want to stand out for something that is maybe not the most popular thing right now. And, so timing is so important. We just have to keep tilling the soil, watering the plant, watering the seed, and eventually the plant becomes a tree.
Do you think there's any chance that if we have a trifecta next year that we can actually get very fast?
With a lot of pressure, with a lot of outside pressure on Democrats, because, like I said,
Hi, Rhoda. How are you?
hey, how you doing?
Christina, nice to see you. Yeah.
Great. You ready?
I'm ready.
Yes. Good morning. Wow. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Rana Epting. I'm the Executive Director of Move On. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. I am standing here today representing over 1.4 million Move On members who are demanding accountability from this court here behind us. Let us be clear. In the United States of America, we must ensure that the laws apply equally to everyone. No one should get special treatment. No one is above the law, and no branch of our government should be above accountability. This MAGA Supreme Court, which has overturned decades of progress to take away our basic rights and freedoms, needs to be held accountable. They need to be held accountable for the justices, they need to be held accountable for the justices on this court who act as politicians, not judges. They need to be held accountable for their unethical behavior, and they need to be held accountable for taking millions of dollars from a rich donor with business before the court, and for showing support for those who tried to overthrow the government while deciding key cases on if those very people will be brought to justice. It's not unreasonable, is it? This is why most Americans have lost faith in this institution. They see a Supreme Court that is corrupt and not accountable to both the people and the rule of law. Justice Thomas must recuse himself from cases involving both his financial backers and January 6th and Trump cases. Justice Alito must recuse himself from January 6th and Trump cases. It could not be more clear. They both have a conflict of interest, and they're making a mockery of the very rules that Chief Justice Roberts and the court announced in the last few months. And if they won't hold themselves accountable, then Democrats in the Senate must. Our system requires checks and balances. The Supreme Court is not above accountability. It is not above the law. It is Congress's job to hold hearings, and Democrats cannot shrink from this responsibility. That is what our millions of members are demanding. They have been demanding for years now. Democrats in the Senate need to rise to this occasion and do their job. They are not powerless, and they need to stop acting like they are. Thank you. And with that, I would like to introduce Christina Harvey with Stand Up America. Christina.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rana, for that introduction, and thank you to Move On for your partnership in organizing today's event. I also want to thank Representatives Johnson and Jayapal for being here today and for their leadership in working to reform a Supreme Court that is broken and threatening our democracy and our fundamental freedoms. I'm the executive director of Stand Up America, and I'm here today on behalf of our nearly 2 million members across the country who are standing up every day for the democracy we deserve, including for a Supreme Court that is free from corruption and protects our right to vote and our fundamental freedoms. Right now, this Supreme Court is raising some serious red flags, and they don't all belong to Justice Samuel Alito. This court is rife with corruption and conflicts of interest, and is only accountable to the conservative billionaires who are showering it with gifts and the convicted criminal who appointed 3 of the court's most right-wing members when he was president. As Rana said, one of the most long-serving justices on the court, Justice Samuel Alito, was recently caught flying flags carried by insurrectionists on January 6th in front of his home in New Jersey and Virginia. I don't know about you, but I prefer Supreme Court justices who fly their American flags right side up. Despite this clear show of support for Trump and his attempts to overturn the will of voters to stay in power, Alito has refused to recuse himself from cases involving Trump and the January 6th insurrection. Instead, he is helping deny voters the right to know whether or not Trump has been convicted of federal crimes before they cast their ballots this November. Alito isn't the only one whose conduct is raising red flags on this court. The wife of Justice Clarence Thomas, who's the longest-serving member of the court, was involved in the planning of the January 6th insurrection. Yet he, too, refuses to recuse himself from these cases. In October, we were here together with the Center for Popular Democracy and Move On in front of this same court, preparing to deliver over 400,000 letters to Senate leadership, calling for the Senate to investigate the Supreme Court and to bring the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act to the floor for a vote. A few weeks later in November, the justices announced that they had created their own voluntary code of conduct, and so they wouldn't be needing one from Congress. It's clear now, based on Alito's refusal to recuse himself from these cases, that that voluntary code of conduct is a complete sham. The Supreme Court can't and won't police itself. The right-wing majority on the court is unaccountable, unethical, and unchecked. We need Congress to step up and use its constitutional power as a co-equal branch of government to check this court. That starts with the Senate Judiciary Committee launching a full investigation into Samuel Alito's conduct, complete with hearings. If Alito is going to blame his wife, let him do it under oath. And Senator Schumer bringing an enforceable Supreme Court code of conduct to the floor of the Senate for a vote. It's been 274 days since the Senate Judiciary Committee passed skirt out of committee. It's time to bring it to the floor for a vote now. We need to get every senator on record on where they stand on Supreme Court corruption. The voters deserve to know. So, Leader Schumer, as your constituent and on behalf of the tens of thousands of New Yorkers who are members of Stand Up America, we are asking you to bring an enforceable code of ethics to the floor of the Senate for a vote and to support a full investigation into Justice Alito. We are told that the Senate's agenda is long and the time is short. But I look forward to one day sitting at a college graduation in New York and hearing Senator Schumer tell the story of how he still managed to get it done in 2024 and get every senator on the record on Supreme Court corruption. That comment is so Senator Schumer knows that I'm a real New Yorker. We know about his graduation speeches. We also need to pass Representative Johnson's Term Act, which would implement 18-year term limits for current and future Supreme Court justices. Because insurrectionist flags and voluntary codes of conduct aren't the only things that haven't aged well on the Supreme Court. As a mother, I know that in 18 years, a baby grows up to be a disgruntled teenager. But apparently, in 18 years, a Supreme Court justice grows up to be an angry, disgruntled insurrectionist. Thomas and Alito would be the first to go under the Term Act because no one deserves unchecked power for life. Our members at Stand Up America have driven over 800,000 calls and emails to the court calls and emails to Congress. I'm going to start that again. Our members have driven over 800,000 calls and emails to Congress in support of Supreme Court reform, from ethics to Supreme Court term limits. Democracy champions like Representatives Johnson and Jayapal are fighting from the inside for real reform, but they cannot do it alone. We need their colleagues and Senate leadership to stand up and do something now to hold this unaccountable court accountable. It's now my honor to introduce the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and a true champion for our freedoms, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Stand Up America and to Move On for your incredible leadership, to all the people who have made calls for putting this front and center in terms of the importance to our democracy. I also want to thank my friend Congressman Hank Johnson. It's been my privilege to serve in judiciary with him, and he has been such a leader on this issue, and I look forward to passing his Term Act as soon as possible. The reality is that this country deserves better than a corrupt right-wing Supreme Court that is devoid of public trust or an enforceable ethics code or meaningful accountability to combat corruption. Recent scandals that you've just heard about involving Justice Alito and Justice Thomas have only made this more clear. The court is rapidly losing its legitimacy and the American people's trust. These scandals and the subsequent refusal of these involved justices to recuse themselves from cases involving Donald Trump and the January 6th insurrection are unfortunately not surprising. These actions follow a pattern of extreme partisan behavior and contempt for laws and judicial norms and precedent by right-wing Supreme Court justices, from Justice Thomas accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts and travel from right-wing billionaires to Justice Alito spouting Republican talking points during a speech to his patrons at the Federalist Society. This lack of shame is a pattern, not only in their personal scandals, but in the audacity, the complete audacity to overturn decades of precedent and eliminate the right to abortion in this country. Under federal law, Justice Alito is required to recuse himself in, quote, any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned or where he has a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party. Between the two reported flag incidents, there is zero question that Justice Alito has shown his bias in matters involving Trump and the insurrection, and he should recuse himself. Yet, despite public outcry and congressional calls for accountability, he has not. And Chief Justice John Roberts, who has been trying to give the appearance that he's most concerned with the court's legitimacy, is actually undermining the very court that he seeks to call legitimate by refusing to hold these justices accountable and refusing to speak out on the corrupt and nakedly partisan behavior of justices on his Supreme Court. So we cannot stand by as the court is plagued by scandal after scandal and as justices take advantage of their positions for personal gain. The American people are watching this and saying, this is the highest court of the land that I should trust, when they are bought and paid for by billionaires who give them vacation trips and airplane trips and RVs. This is not how justice should work. Congress needs to do something in a big way, and you've heard some of the immediate things that we are calling for. Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito need to testify publicly and under oath about the flag-waving incidents and how the court handled it. I also have a judicial ethics and anti-corruption bill with Senator Elizabeth Warren, and our bill would strengthen judicial ethics laws, toughen restrictions on gifts and privately funded travel, and impose an enforceable code of conduct on the Supreme Court. How is it possible that the highest court of the land does not have any way to enforce what became an ethics code just last year, but with no accountability, no enforceability? It is absurd that the Supreme Court is literally the only federal court in the country not subject to a binding ethical code. We're at a point where some justices lack even any perceived semblance of impartiality. And that's bad for our country. It's bad for our democracy. It's bad for the rule of law. It's bad for people's faith that there is a justice system that is actually weighing those scales for the good of the country. When justices push conspiracy theories about our elections, that is really bad for our country. I was in the House gallery on January 6th. That was a violent attack on democracy. I didn't know if I would make it out of the chamber alive that day. And anyone affiliated with the Stop the Steal movement that fueled the insurrection absolutely should not have a hand in deciding and determining the cases related to that insurrection. Justice Alito and other right-wing justices have also already done Donald Trump a massive favor just by agreeing to hear the argument that he's immune from consequences for his criminal acts. The court has delayed his trial. We need to know all the facts about Justice Alito's corruption before he has a chance to do even more damage to our rights and our democracy. Again, I'm so grateful to the groups that are organizing around this, making sure the American people know there is something that can be done. The Senate can act, Congress must act, and we need to make sure that we are holding this Supreme Court accountable. You want me to introduce him? And with that, it's my great honor to introduce my colleague who's been such a champion, such a friend for democracy, Representative Hank Johnson from Georgia.
Thank you, Pramila. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the folks at Move On and Stand Up America for convening us today. All of the other stakeholder organizations that are represented here today, I want to thank you all. I want to thank all of you all out here for being here for this important gathering. You see, there's a 5-alarm fire that is consuming our democracy if we let it. And so we need all hands on deck at this point in time. We have had a president who has had such disrespect for our Constitution and the rule of law while he occupied the White House, and he used that power to try to usurp the vote and remain in power, the ultimate constitutional attack. And he sent folks over here to our legislative branch on January 6th in this Stop the Steal movement. And even after the violent insurrection occurred, we had members of Congress who refused to certify the results of an election that they knew was full and fair and complete. And then today, after that same president, ex-president, has been held accountable in a court of law in New York, we've got members of the legislative branch who are doing everything they can to undermine the system of justice that produced that guilty verdict and trying to overturn it with their friends here in the United States Supreme Court. So we have a 5-alarm fire, not just in the executive and the legislative branches, but we've got one that is consuming the judicial branch, the linchpin of our democracy that enforces the rule of law upon which our democracy is based. This court has been purchased by those who, the same folks who have given Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society the largest political contribution in history, $1.6 billion. It was in part a reward for what he has done to capture this court, and it was also seed money to continue those efforts. And so this is a dumpster fire. It's a 5-alarm fire. All hands on deck. Thank you all for being here. There are things that we can do to put out the fire. Number one, we need to have some hearings over in the Senate to bring some water and some light. Well, you know, fire produces light, but we need to put some water on that fire through some hearings to bring some people in. Nobody is immune and unaccountable to the legislative branch. We are Article 1. But we do have some archaic rules over there called the filibuster, one of those that is preventing the Senate from moving, but we have a majority and we can change the rules with a majority. So it's going to take a lot of public pressure from you all to make it happen. We have an election coming up in November. We need to elect representatives and senators who believe that we need to put the dumpster fire out right here at the United States Supreme Court. This is a court that has shown us time and time again that it is moving not in accord with the Constitution and the American people, but in accord with the corporate interests that have purchased it and the ideological forces that that bring issues to this court that divide people and put this court in a position to take legislative authority and take executive authority and do what it wants to do, regardless of what the people want to do. So this is a court that is out of control. It's a court that needs to be reined in. We can also pass legislation, the CERT Act, Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act, which would put forth a code of conduct that would bind this court, along with an enforcement mechanism to make sure that that code of conduct was adhered to. We can also pass the Term Act, the Tenure Establishment and Retirement Modernization Act, which would impose 18-year term limits on Supreme Court justices. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, we can pass the Judiciary Act, which would actually add 4 seats to this court and rebalance it. Those are the things that we need to do in order to restore accountability, restore public trust and confidence in this very important co-equal branch of government, which is now taken more power for itself than the Constitution intended. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to now turn it over to Mr. Jake Falashini, Justice Program Director of Alliance for Justice.
Thank you so much, Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Congressman, for being such an ally in Congress and for all the work that you're doing on this and so many other important issues. Appreciate you. My name is Jake Falaschini. I'm the Justice Program Director at the Alliance for Justice. I want to thank our friends at Move On and at Stand Up America for pulling this event together today. Thank you so much. To our friends in Congress and all our other allies who have joined us here today. Since 1979, the Alliance for Justice has been a leader in advocating for a fair and independent justice system. And we have changed the conversation around the critical importance of the courts. Our 150 member organizations represent a broad array of groups committed to progressive values. At AFJ, we are building progressive power and transforming courts to secure justice for all. But we're here in front of the Supreme Court today because one very conspicuous court isn't living up to our values. Instead, it's eroding faith in the independence and impartiality of the entire justice system. Last year, we learned about the many ways in which Justice Thomas's personal and financial interests influenced his decisions on the court. He must resign. And then roughly 2 weeks ago, we learned that Justice Alito's political biases were literally flagged for the entire nation above not 1, but 2 of his homes. Justice Alito knows that he has an obligation to not even appear to be impartial, but he has openly flaunted his biases to the world. How can he swear to protect the Constitution and then stand by as his own home signals support for overturning a fair and democratic election? We all know the truth. He can't. At a bare minimum, Alito needs to recuse himself from all January 6 cases or cases involving President Trump. Alito joins Thomas in being a justice who isn't just partisan, but is willfully degrading the integrity of the entire justice system. Even Justice Roberts has abandoned his duties. He doesn't appear either willing or capable of addressing his colleagues' corruption and abuses of power. Congress cannot wait for the court to act. It must pass and enforce the ethics, transparency, and accountability measures that this court refuses to create for itself. It is more evident than ever just how desperately we need reforms such as an enforceable code of conduct, term limits to rein in the abuses of power, and yes, even potentially expanding the Supreme Court's members. Enough is enough. This is the most disgraceful court in the nation's history, and it is long past time that they were held accountable. Thousands of our members have signed petitions calling for investigations and for structural reform to fix the court. We're grateful to hand over those petitions to the members of Congress today who have shown themselves up to the task. We hope that more of our electeds will follow their leadership and do everything they can to rein in this corrupt Supreme Court. With that, I'm happy to turn over the mic to my old colleague at the Center for American Progress, Maggie Jo Buchanan, who is now the Managing Director of Demand Justice.
Thank you so much, Jake. Good morning. As Jake said, my name is Maggie Jo Buchanan, and I am the Managing Director at Demand Justice. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to Move On and Stand Up for bringing us together. As the speakers before me have made clear, we are at a crucial moment in time. Report after report has revealed deep corruption and partisanship in our nation's highest court, yet the justices continue on unchecked, all while Donald Trump cheers them on. This is not normal, and this is not acceptable. To start, we need an immediate and full-fledged investigation into Alito's conduct, as well as, crucially, the Chief Justice's handling of these serious ethics scandals plaguing the institution he is supposed to serve and represent. The American people deserve answers, yet the justices seem unwilling to take questions. Justice Alito must not be allowed to decide cases related to the election. This is not how our court is supposed to function. How can the public trust justices with clear extremist, partisan leanings to decide the fate of our democracy? A Supreme Court that is wholly unaccountable to anyone but themselves is not an institution that is working for the people any longer. And even before this latest transgression by Justice Alito, the court is in desperate need of reform. It has become insulated from accountability in a way that hurts the everyday Americans who are impacted daily by its rulings. From reproductive rights, to gun violence, to clean air and fair elections, the Supreme Court has stood in the way of the rights and well-being of all of us. Term limits, a binding code of ethics, and a rebalancing of the Supreme Court are all essential reforms necessary to rein in a runaway court. But in this moment, it is also critical that Congress shows its willingness to do its job and conduct oversight. Because to be clear, the American people want reform. And despite opposition by Republican leaders of Congress to putting in place even the most basic common sense ethic rules for the court, this isn't a partisan issue. Nearly 3/4 of Americans think the judiciary is too powerful. And that is a view that is shared by independents, Democrats, and Republicans alike. The legitimacy of the Supreme Court, our democracy, and our country is at stake. Now is the time to act. Thank you. And now I am honored to hand over the mic to Yvonne, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Reproductive Freedom for All.
Thank you, Maggie Jo. Thank you all so much. I'm Yvonne Gutierrez. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Reproductive Freedom for All. I'm excited to be here representing our over 4 million members. Thank you to Reps Johnson and Jayapal and to all of our partners here today to discuss the crisis our nation's highest court faces and what we can do and must do to address it. 2 years ago, the corrupt and extremist anti-abortion majority on the Supreme Court handed down its decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. That day, they ended our constitutional right to abortion and gave the green light to anti-abortion politicians nationwide to begin enforcing abortion bans. Every day, since we've seen the horrifying and dangerous repercussions of these bans play out in states across our country and continue to do so. Already, 21 states have eliminated or restricted access because of abortion bans, and if these extremists have their way, they'll ban abortion in every state. If that wasn't bad enough, the same conservative justices who ended Roe have another opportunity in front of them to further decimate reproductive freedom. These same justices who have shown us that they prioritize special interests over the rights of the American people will soon announce their decisions in 2 more cases that could further endanger abortion in our country. Meanwhile, reporting continues to emerge, adding to Justice Alito's long list of ethical scandals. These new revelations about his behavior following the days of the January 6th insurrection make it abundantly clear that Alito is operating with no accountability and zero concern for the integrity of our nation's highest court. And if this isn't the first time that he's shown blatant disregard for Americans' fundamental rights and freedoms, including reproductive freedoms. According to previous reporting from the New York Times, Alito shared the outcome of the court's decision in Burwell versus Hobby Lobby weeks before it was announced, allowing for an anti-abortion activist to prepare a public relations push and tip off the head of the chain. That decision allowed bosses to block their employees' access to birth control. And Justice Alito later authored the Dobbs decision itself. The bottom line is this: every person, no matter who they are, where they live, or what they believe, must have the freedom to make their own decisions about pregnancy, parenthood, and abortion. These decisions should be made by a person who is pregnant with their doctors, not by politicians, and not by corrupt justices that we cannot count on to deliver fair and impartial decisions. The time to restore faith in the court is now, and to do so, Justice Alito's actions must be investigated, and we must reform the court, including through a binding code of ethics. Our rights, freedoms, and lives are on the line. And with stakes this high, we cannot afford to give an inch. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jennifer Flynn Walker, co-chief of campaigns at the Center for Popular Democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Move On and Stand Up, and Representative Jayapal and Johnson. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Flynn Walker, and I'm the co-chief of campaigns at the Center for Popular Democracy. CPD is a network of 51 of the most badass community organizations located all across the country, organizing people around climate justice, housing, healthcare, immigration, abortion access, education, and more. The members of our affiliates gather around kitchen tables, in community centers, in cramped offices, crafting solutions to community problems. And they look to the Supreme Court to protect their rights, their freedom, their education, housing, health care. They deserve a Supreme Court that will uphold the law and will protect them. But increasingly, we realize that we can't rely on this SCOTUS to protect us or our communities. We aren't surprised, but we are disappointed. The members of our affiliates traveled to Washington, D.C. a couple years ago by hundreds every day during the confirmation hearings of Justice Kavanaugh to try to ensure that only the most honorable among us could reach that lifetime position. Given the outcome, we aren't surprised by the character of some of the members of this Supreme Court, but we are disappointed. And here we are once again, not surprised, but once again disappointed. This Supreme Court finds itself entangled in an unprecedented ethics crisis. I feel like every day now I say that's unprecedented, so another day, another use of that word. Recent reports have brought to light troubling symbols supporting January 6th insurrectionists displayed at the homes of Justice Samuel Alito. And such revelations strike at the very core of our judicial system, calling into question Justice Alito's ability to uphold the principles of fairness and impartiality that are essential to the functioning of our highest court. We aren't surprised, but we are disappointed that we're here once again. The actions of Justice Alito, among others, have eroded our trust and respect on which the court's authority rests. We aren't surprised, but we are disappointed and disheartened to note that today, 6 in 10 Americans express not very much confidence or no confidence at all in this Supreme Court. The erosion of public trust is not only damaging to the credibility of the court, but it also undermines our democracy. With every new scandal that emerges, it becomes increasingly clear that we simply cannot rely on the Supreme Court to hold itself accountable to the same ethical standards as other federal judges. Again, we aren't surprised, but we are disappointed, and we are demanding oversight and accountability mechanisms for this SCOTUS. Congress has a duty to act as a check on the Supreme Court and to restore faith in our judicial system. The members of the affiliates of the Center for Popular Democracy that are gathering around those kitchen tables, attending those school board and community meetings, deserve an investigation of Justice Alito. And by the way, Senator Schumer, I'm also from New York, and so are a lot of our affiliates. We have 4 affiliates with thousands of members in New York, and they deserve an investigation of Justice Alito, full hearings on his misconduct, and a passing of a binding code of ethics for the Supreme Court justices. And we need to expand the court, and we need to have term limits. So I'm not surprised that we are here today, but we at CPD remain hopeful that we will once again not be disappointed. So we're from a community organizing group, so we do chants. So I'm going to try one here. Too corrupt to rule. Too corrupt to rule. Too corrupt to rule. Too corrupt to rule. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexis Martinez, a campaign director at Move On. I just want to say thank you so much for everyone to come spending the morning with us. Thank you to our amazing partners and speakers for being here. As we've all said today, Congress has the power to rein in on the corruption in the Supreme Court, and they need to take action now. After this, Move On will be delivering over 100,000 signatures to Senators Durbin and Schumer, demanding that they take action immediately to hold Justice Alito accountable and stop corruption on the court. Thank you all again for being here, and we will be around for comments or interviews, and thank you again.